On this episode of Muscle Car of the Week, we're checking out a very cool 67 Camaro Z28 that's got some neat vintage speed equipment. There have been many different high-performance versions of Camaros that you could buy right from your Chevrolet dealer, but the one that kind of started it all was the 1967 Camaro Z28. And if we rewind back to 1966, we can see that the SCCA was going to launch Trans Am racing in 1967. And Trans Am racing was to use what they were calling sedan cars as race cars. And what they meant by sedan was these were cars that had a back seat. So Trans Am was open to European and American cars from any country basically, as long as it fit within a certain wheelbase, had the back seat, and also had an engine size that was smaller than 305 cubic inches, you could compete in Trans Am. And Ford had the Mustang with a 289 cubic inch V8. Plymouth had the Barracuda with its 273 cubic inch V8. So Chevrolet was looking at being able to compete with these guys. The Mustang and the Barracuda had been out for a few years before the Camaro, so Camaro really needed to start strong. And that's where they came up with RPO option code Z28, which was the car we see here. It's a very, very neat car. They took a 283 cubic inch crankshaft and a 327 cubic inch block, put the pieces together to come up with a 302 cubic inch V8. And then they added some high performance parts in the form of an aluminum 4-barrel carburetor intake manifold, a different camshaft, a solid lifter cam, did a high performance distributor, and some exhaust manifolds that were kind of free flowing to come up with something that was advertised to be around 290 horsepower. I don't think Chevrolet actually ever stated the true horsepower of this car, but that's what they were going for. And you couple that with the mandatory 4-speed manual transmission, heavy-duty clutch, and in this case, a 410 rear gear ratio with a limited slip differential, monoleaf springs in back with a traction bar on one side to keep the spring from wrapping up, power brakes, they all came with power brakes, disc brakes in front, and special springs, and you ended up with a car that was the Z28. And visually, it had a pair of stripes on the hood and the deck lid, but the hood was flat. But the Chevrolet engineers came up with a neat way to feed air into the carburetor through the use of a cowl. It's a cowl induction, meaning it took air from the base of the windshield in a low pressure zone. This early cowl induction design is pretty cool. It uses fresh air that comes in from the cowl screen and then into that elbow that's mounted to the firewall, through the rubber isolator and into this big air cleaner unit which feeds the dual quad carburetors. This was something that you saw in Trans Am racing back in the day. That eventually evolved into the cowl induction hood, which was a raised cowl induction hood that you could get in 1969. The very first Z28s all went to dealerships that turned them into race cars and competed in the Trans Am series. And it's pretty cool because that little 302 cubic inch engine was able to make a lot more power using stock parts, but just with proper assembly techniques, blueprinting, ignition curves, some fuel tune-ups. And we've got, stories of these things making 300, 350, in some cases over 400 horsepower from the likes of engine builders like Smokey Yunick and Traco in Southern California. So they were really hot performers, and the Camaro did pretty well in Trans Am. Now this particular car is a real 67 Z28. It's one of the 602 produced. It's wearing its original colors, marina blue with a black vinyl top. Although this car appears to have most of its original paint, and the look looks pretty much stock with the vinyl top and the black stripes, I'm not sure GM ever took the time to cut out the black around the C of the Chevrolet logo on the deck lid, but it's kind of a neat detail. It's got a lot of neat options on it. The very rare fold-down rear seat. It's got deluxe interior. It's got retractable seat belts. The interior of the Z28 is pretty much how it left the factory, but just a couple things added on. The Muncie 4-speed stick handle, no console, basic bucket seats, But there's some cool Stuart Warner green line gauges hanging from the bottom of the dash. Water temperature, oil temperature, that's kind of a neat one, oil pressure, and an amp gauge. There's also a Stuart Warner tack on the steering column, mounted old style with the hose clamp, and it's positioned so that you shift when the needle points straight up. These cars had 15 by 6 inch steel rally wheels, where the rest of the Camaros had 14s. This car is wearing all of its correct 15 by 6 date coated wheels. It's got red striped tires like it had from the factory. These are a new version, but the same correct size that it would have come with back in the day. But this particular car was restored to its original condition, and a subsequent owner decided to kind of jazz it up a little bit and put some options and some performance parts on the car that you could get during the days of Trans Am racing. This is kind of a neat package under here because it has a bunch of parts that were added on after it was bought new, but they kind of fit the period that this car was built in. The most interesting is the dual quad cross ram intake manifold. Now this put two 4-barrel carburetors on opposite sides, and it draws fresh air in through the cowl. And as far as we can tell, this is a kit that you used to be able to get from your local Chevy dealer, and you could add this on afterwards. It's got the correct linkage, it's got the correct Holley carburetors, it's got the correct fasteners, everything about it. In fact, the story is that some of the pieces, like the super rare cross ram cowl induction air cleaner assembly, that piece actually came from Mark Donahue, who was one of the racers in Trans Am back in the day. So the guys that built this car sought out very unique performance parts from the likes of Traco, which built some of the Trans Am racing engines for Mark Donahue and Roger Penske and Dan Gurney, and those parts can be found on this car. So it also is wearing a set of headers that were a dealer option back in 1967. They came in the trunk, and they let you put them on or let a dealer put them on. But the other cool thing is that all of the original parts that make a 67 Z28 that came with the car originally are still with the car. So they still have the original aluminum 4-barrel intake and the carburetor and some of the pieces that were replaced by these other higher performance items. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's kind of a time machine. If you were to have a 67 Z28 in 1967 and you wanted to make it run really hard, you would have put this stuff on it, and that's kind of like where the story ends. It's a snapshot of kind of the ultimate 67 Z28 street car you could have back in 1967. It's a super neat car, and it's one of the few in the Brothers collection that's actually been modified, but it does have these period correct modifications. So it's definitely a standout in the collection, but it fits in with their other cool, historically significant cars. So you can see more pictures of this Z28 on our website at MuscleCarOfTheWeek.com, and we've got the Facebook page. Go there and share this and all the other cars with all of your friends on Facebook. And of course, the YouTube channel has a button to subscribe. You click that and you'll never miss an episode of Muscle Car of the Week.